So recently, I showed you guys the very first Republican primary 2024 poll that I've seen. And if I remember correctly, you had Trump up there, but you had Romney nipping at his heels. It was like Trump 26%, Romney 20%. Forget who did that poll, but if I remember correctly, it was a company I had never heard of. So we covered that and talked about it, and my takeaway from it was that's the exact split in the Republican Party that I predicted and I expected. You're gonna have the more establishment Republicans, the elitist Republicans, who want to put that mask back on, put the veneer in the facade and do the kabuki theater of like, we're serious people, we're polite and have decorum. The DC elite Republicans are going to want to do that. But the Trumpists don't want to go back. They want to have the guy with no filter. They want to have the guy who shoots from the hip. They want to have the guy who's loud and aggressive. He just culturally, he fits with middle income and lower income Republicans so much better. And the more upper middle income and rich Republicans want a guy more like Mitt Romney. So that poll showed that split in a very clear way. And, you know, in my mind, I thought, well, definitely the Trump side is going to be bigger. Even though Trump just lost, and usually losers have to go away for a while, Trump's just not even acknowledging that he lost. And so he's sort of like plowing forward. And so as a result of that, his numbers are still high, and they're higher than the Romney wing, and I think they will continue to be higher than the Romney wing. But Romney made a good showing. Well, now we have a new poll that came out, which actually I think kind of destroys the previous narrative. This is really interesting. So this one is from McLaughlin and Newsmax. Now you could say perhaps this isn't the most trusted source, but I don't know. The last poll, who knows if that was trusted either. I really don't know. But there is a narrative here to discuss. So 2024 National Republican primary without Trump. Look at this. Pence, 20%. Trump Jr., 20%. Cruz, 7%. Haley, 6%. Romney, 5%. Ivanka Trump, 4%. Kasich, 3%. Rubio, 3%. DeSantis, 2%. Cotton, 2%. Noam, 2%. Tim Scott, 2%. Pompeo, 1%. Tucker Carlson, 1%. Rick Scott, 0%. So, if the previous poll said you're going to have a Republican civil war, it's going to be the elitist Republicans versus the Trumpist Republicans. What this poll says is, ain't no civil war, son. That war's over, and the Trump wing won. That's what this says. Because Mike Pence, 20%, and then Trump Jr. tied for the lead at 20%. Guys, that's 40% in a fractured field already saying we're Trump ride or die. Damn, son. But I'm going to even go a step further than that. Ted Cruz has aligned himself more with the Trump wing of the party. He has. That's what he's done. That's his new identity. And so since he's done that, you got to add his 7% to the Trump wing. So that's 47% of the party, of the voters, already saying we're Trump ride or die. The only people who don't fall into that Trump wing on this list of the relevant players, Nikki Haley, 6%, and Mitt Romney, 5%. So the non-Trumpist Republicans, it's only 11% of the voters. Only 11% of the voters are the non-Trump Republicans. Man, that's something, isn't it? So Trump already won. He already won the Civil War. Because Pence is the only reason he is where he is because he hitched his wagon to Trump. Pence is there. Trump Jr. is there, which, Jesus Christ, man, the fact that we probably have to deal with Trump Jr. and Mayor Pete for the rest of our lives, like they will always be on the political scene, that really is one of the most depressing facts I've ever heard. I don't know if I have it in me to watch these totally soulless, vapid cretins pretend to care about the world and policy as really they're just coasting off their narcissism and careerism. I want to die when I think about that fact. But the main takeaway from this poll is, ain't no Republican Civil War. It's actually over, and it's already been won by Trump. It's already been won. Now, the takeaway, though, is Trump's going to run, so I don't even know why. Like, doing a poll without Trump almost seems silly. Unless he has some sort of health emergency or he dies, he's going to run. And so there's no reason to do a poll without Trump. But this goes to show you a post-Trump GOP is still the Trump party. He permanently remade that party. And there are lessons in this. There are lessons in this for the establishment, but there are lessons that they'll never learn and they'll never adjust. It really is pathetic if you think about it, because it shows the Republican establishment was a house of cards. And so it was so easy for a fake populist to come along and just topple that house of cards. The Democratic establishment, too, is just a house of cards. It's a bunch of careerist corporate idiots. People like Neera Tanden. But because Bernie didn't have that killer instinct and the Democratic establishment is a little better organized, they were able to defeat the insurgent left, the populist left. But in the long run, you should feel like we have a real chance of taking this over, because they're a house of cards also, to a large extent. They really are. There's the Republican establishment, but outside of the Republican establishment, it's not like there are many voters who are Republican establishment voters. The actual Republican voters are Trump ride or die. What are they going to learn from this? They're going to learn nothing, and they're going to double down on their faults. But the old fake respectability stuff, gone. Especially on the right. It's just gone. They don't care about your decorum. They don't care about your civility. They just don't care about that. Funny enough, those voters, I don't think on policy, like economic policy, they're not as conservative as the likes of Mitt Romney. And that's why Trump had a real opportunity if he wanted to actually be a populist. He could have done some populist things and his base would have loved it, but he didn't do it. He just let the status quo continue. And so Trump really blew an opportunity. He did. But, he was never ideological anyway. Like, all of his populism was fake. Everything about him was just like a show. But he had an opportunity because his base would have supported, if Trump decided to give everybody healthcare, they would have supported it. If he decided to expand Social Security, Medicare, they would have supported it. If he decided to stop all outsourcing, they would have supported it. But he didn't. He kept the establishment going. So now the defining feature of Trumpism is the no filter and the culture war. And Trump is actually willing to engage in that culture war, whereas the Romney types, that's back burner issues for them. They're actual Kool-Aid drinking believers in the trickle-down economics, the Reaganomics, the deregulation. And they're just not as appealing. The fake decorum is not as appealing as somebody who just sort of says what they're thinking. And so there's no going back. Now the Republican Party is officially the Trump Party, and there is no going back to the pre-Trump Republican Party. And you'll see, like, an overrepresentation in the media class, especially in print outlets, especially on CNN, MSNBC. You'll see them insist that that is a thing that can happen and that should happen and that will happen. But it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. So every Republican president for the rest of our lives is going to need Trump's blessing. Isn't that crazy? You made a kingmaker out of a child. They really did that. And that should tell you something about how colossal of a failure the Republican establishment was in the first place. That this man-child could sort of topple it, barely trying, not even probably thinking he's going to win, and then he did. So perhaps my original narrative of that Republican Civil War is wrong. And to be fair to me, I do think the Republican Civil War is real, but it's going to be more of the elitist Republicans, the establishment Republicans going up against Trump and his people, but they don't really have the numbers. They don't have the numbers. So it's going to be more of a veneer of a fight than an actual fight. But I think it works in a similar way on the Democratic side, too. It's that the elite Democrats, they don't really have numbers of people who support them. You know what I mean? The left actually has the numbers of the people who support them. But just the fact that the moneyed interests are on the side of the establishment Democrats makes the establishment Democrats a force to be reckoned with. On the Republican side, perhaps it's the same thing. Perhaps the fact that the Romney types are backed up with all the money, that they will be a force to be reckoned with too. And they'll try to fight back against the Trump-like Republicans. But I don't know. It's all yet to be seen. But this is an incredibly interesting dynamic. And the main takeaway is there's no going back. This is Trump's party, and it's going to remain Trump's party no matter what people want to do about that.